Charles Dickens' darkest secret was what he did to his sister-in-law's body after she died. Dickens was arguably the first modern celebrity. In his day, novels were released in monthly installments. Readers would throng the shops when a new chapter was released, eager to find out what would happen to their favorite character next, not unlike the way people today get hyped for a new season of their favorite show. When Charles Dickens visited America, he was overwhelmed by mobs of fans desperate to meet him. Even illiterate people enjoyed his novels, pooling their cash to pay readers to publicly recite his stories to them. But not many people actually knew what Dickens was like behind closed doors. His personal life was more troubled than anyone at the time realized. Charles Dickens was born on February 7, 1812 in Hampshire. He was the second of 8 children of Elizabeth and John Dickens. John Dickens was a clerk in the Navy Pay Office, which ironically didn't pay very well. With so many mouths to feed and so little income, John was unable to provide for his family, and his wife was too busy taking care of the children to even consider getting a job. Not to mention, it was also still just uncommon for women to work at that time. Through Charles' childhood, the family's financial situation only got worse, and John Dickens was not smart with the little money he did have. Before they knew it, the family was in debt. They were forced to sell all of their furniture and household items, but even this was not enough to get them in the clear. John moved his family to different towns frequently in hopes of escaping the debt collectors. John's inability to manage money would embarrass Charles throughout his life, and later on he would betray his famous son in disgraceful ways for cash. In 1824, when Charles was just 12 years old, his father was arrested and sent to Marshalsea debtors' prison, apparently because he owed a baker 40 pounds. Charles' mother and youngest sibling were also forced into prison alongside John, as that was the practice at the time. With most of his family imprisoned, Charles's life was turned upside down. He was sent to live with an old family friend named Elizabeth Roylance. He described her as a reduced, impoverished old lady, long known to our family. Charles became the new head of the family, and with that came new responsibilities. In order to pay for his board and help his family out in prison, he had to drop out of school and get a job. He spent the next year working tirelessly at Warren's blackening factory, which was a rat-infested warehouse that produced shoe polish. Charles worked 10-hour shifts and only made a measly 6 shillings a week. He usually spent his workdays pasting labels onto pots and boot blackening. This experience influenced how Charles viewed labor conditions as well as economic status. It is safe to say that it had quite the impact on his later writings. A few months after his imprisonment, John Dickens' mother, Elizabeth, passed away. With her passing came an inheritance of £450. Although the loss of his mother was sad, the money was a definite silver lining for a man rotting in debtors' prison with his wife and children. The windfall was enough to pay their debts and buy their freedom, but it wasn't exactly the family reunion Charles was hoping for. The family only spent a few months in prison, but even after their release, Charles's mother insisted he stay working at the factory, despite the boy expressing his hatred for the job. Her desire to keep him working at the warehouse resulted in a lifelong resentment towards her, and an overall dissatisfied attitude towards women. He could not fathom how a loving mother could knowingly leave her child in such harsh conditions. Eventually, Charles was sent back to school at the Wellington House Academy in Camden Town, where he remained until 1827. Though his time there was not what he had hoped for. In fact, he had a miserable time in the school. The teaching was poor, the conditions were severely strict, and the headmaster was considered sadistic. After the 2 years in school, now 15 years old, Dickens went back to work to once again support his family. Although this time the job was a bit more bearable. He landed himself a position as a junior clerk at the law office of Ellis and Blackmore. This job ended up being a blessing in disguise, as this is where he found his passion. It was at this time that he became obsessed with the theater. He claimed that for at least 3 years he went to the theater every day. This inspired him to become a writer. In his spare time, he learned Gurney's system of shorthand. Then shortly after this, he quit his job to become a freelance reporter. Dickens had a distant relative that did freelance reporting at the College of Civilians. and he was able to join his relative and report on legal proceedings for 4 years. Dickens may have been busy with his family, as well as with his new passion, but that didn't stop him from experiencing the most out of life. In 1830, Dickens experienced something truly remarkable: love at first sight. He fell head over heels for a woman named Maria Beadnell. Despite how he felt about her, the relationship was short-lived. Maria's parents disapproved of their daughter dating him. His low social status was not acceptable to them, so they shipped their daughter away to a school in Paris, promptly ending the relationship. This is just another example of how being poor negatively impacted Dickens' life. Though we recognize Dickens as a highly skilled writer, this was not always his dream. He actually tried to become an actor first. He got himself an audition at Covent Garden Theatre, which he was extremely excited for. He believed this could be his big break. Dickens prepared meticulously. However, he never made it to the audition. He became sick right before the meeting, shattering his chance at stardom. Before another opportunity arose, Charles turned to writing. In 1833, he published his very first story called A Dinner at Poplar Walk in a London magazine. During this time, he worked various jobs, including as a political journalist for the House of Commons. He also started publishing his own works in 1836, which would be his ticket to fortune and fame. Dickens quickly made progress in not only his professional life, but also his social life. During his time as a journalist, he befriended a man named George Hogarth, who was a music critic. The two men spent a lot of time together. Dickens regularly visited Hogarth's home. Eventually, he was introduced to Hogarth's 3 daughters, Georgina, Mary, and Catherine. Although the loss of Maria Beadnell was still relatively fresh, Charles was quickly drawn to 19-year-old Catherine. He didn't know it at the time, but it was a disaster waiting to happen. Shortly after their initial meeting in 1834, Dickens and Catherine got engaged, and eventually got married in April 1836. In the beginning, the marriage was like something out of a fairy tale, but soon the harsh reality of life struck. Having a total of 10 children together, Dickens seemed to follow in his father's footsteps, even though his childhood was not exactly joyous. And the amount of children was not where the similarities with his father stopped. He was also just not a great parent. Dickens had his own idea of success that he constantly pushed onto his children, but the expectations he put on them were just unachievable, leading to him being constantly disappointed in them. Charles's father John continued to disappoint as well. He got himself thrown into a debtor's prison a second time, and Charles had to borrow money to bail him out. Charles then rented a country cottage for his father to live in, desperate to keep him out of the public eye. But John embarrassed his newly famous son by writing to publishers, begging for money. He also auctioned off pages from original manuscripts of Charles's novels. To make matters worse, everything came crashing down on April 14, 1851. Dora Dickens, the second youngest child of Charles, suddenly died due to convulsions. The night it happened, Dickens was out attending a special dinner. By the time he returned home, his beloved 8-month-old daughter had already passed. This event shook the entire family to their core and put a strain on Charles and Catherine's marriage. Dickens' attraction to his wife started diminishing after this. With his eyes already starting to wander, it's not much of a surprise that when he got the opportunity to reconnect with his first love, Maria Beadnell, he jumped on it. They started by exchanging letters. After a while, Dickens insisted they meet up in secret, despite Maria warning him that she had changed a lot over the years. Upon seeing her, he immediately lost interest, seeing she had gotten old and fat. Honestly, that's a lot of nerve coming from someone who doesn't exactly look like Prince Charming himself. Like, have you seen that hairline? With Maria out of the picture and his marriage still in shambles, Charles moved on. In 1857, he became infatuated with a young actress named Ellen Ternan, who he had hired for a play. He quickly became obsessed with her. And as the obsession with Ternan grew, so did the hatred for his wife. In an attempt to get rid of her, he slandered her in public, claiming she was a terrible mother and suffered from mental illness. She was evaluated by a doctor who found no proof of this. After this accusation, in 1858, Charles and Catherine separated, understandably not on good terms. And while Charles's married life was riddled with complications, possibly his true darkest secret was a secret obsession with his sister-in-law, Mary Hogarth. Their seemingly friendly relationship started when he first started courting Catherine, but it continued on into their marriage. Mary even lived with them for a year. She was also apparently the first person to ever read Pickwick Papers and Oliver Twist, as Dickens valued her input more than his own wife's. In the early hours of May 7, 1837, Mary had suddenly collapsed and died, seeming from heart failure. She was only 17 years old. This death affected Charles quite a lot. In fact, he was so grief-stricken that he missed the publication dates for 2 of his books. As a reason for missing the publication dates, he wrote that he lost a very dear young relative to whom he was most affectionately attached, and whose society has been, for a long time, the chief solace of his labors. On top of this, after Mary died, he took a ring from her finger and wore it for the rest of his life. He also cut off a lock of her hair and carried it everywhere he went. Naturally, this unusually close relationship with his sister-in-law has led to, well, we'll say rumors and leave it at that. In his later life, Charles Dickens became unwell and experienced bouts of paralysis. Eventually, this led to a stroke in 1869. He survived but was told by his doctor that he needed to rest. However, the second time he was not so lucky. On June 8, 1870, Dickens had another stroke while at home working on a novel. He never regained consciousness. The next day, he was officially pronounced dead. Contrary to his wish to be buried at Rochester Cathedral in an inexpensive, unostentatious, and strictly private manner, he was instead laid to rest in the Poets' Corner of Westminster Abbey. In his will, he left his estate to his longtime colleague John Forster and his best and truest friend Georgina Hogarth, who, along with Dickens's 2 sons, also received a tax-free sum of £8,000. He also confirmed his wife Catherine's annual allowance of £600. Lastly, Dickens left a legacy of £1,000 to Turner in his will, precisely the same amount as his unmarried daughter, and sufficient income from a trust fund to ensure that she would never have to work again. That's all we have for today's video. Let us know your thoughts down in the comments below. What do you think about his odd obsession with Mary? Or how he tried to end his marriage? Also, if you want to see more content from us, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching.